We can go ahead and go to the next slide again. Thank you. So the purpose of today's workshop is to provide parties to the investigation and stakeholders with a forum to ask questions about and discuss the proposed safety and culture improvement plan that SoCalGas and Sempra filed on July 29th. The filing was in response to the Phase 2 scoping ruling that was issued on April 27th of this year. We are fortunate to have CPUC's leadership with us today. Joining us on the virtual dais, we have President Reynolds and her fellow commissioners, Hauk, Commissioner Reynolds, and Commissioner Shiroma. Commissioner Rechtschaffen will be joining us soon, so we'll move on in the meantime. We can go ahead to the next slide, please. In terms of format for today's workshop, we will start with opening remarks from the dais, followed by a brief background on this proceeding. We will then launch into a presentation by SoCalGas and Sempra on their proposed safety and culture improvement plan, followed by a 10-minute break. We'll then move on to question and open discussion, followed by informal public comments. We are scheduled to conclude today at 12:30 p.m. You can go to the next slide. So to effectively use everyone's time, I'd like to emphasize that there are two different types of participation today. The first is a Q&A discussion, open discussion session designed for parties to ask questions from SoCalGas and Sempra about the plan and just Phase 2 in general. The second is dedicated time for informal public comment or statements at the end of today's agenda. So if you're a party or stakeholder and have a question, please use the Q&A time. If you're a member of the public and have a comment or statement that you would like to voice, please use the informal public comment session. These are all informal and not part of the record of the proceeding at the moment. Please make note of these two different options so you're heard at the appropriate time. Also, please keep in mind that we may not get to everybody, but we will do our best to get as many questions and comments as possible. We can go to the next slide, please. So to participate, WebEx participants, just raise your hand or use the chat option. Phone participants, dial *3. This will alert a technical host. Telephone listeners are only identifiable to us by the first 6 digits of their phone number. So starting with area code, so just please make note of those 6 digits and listen out for them when you're waiting to speak. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. Some additional reminders for you. This workshop is being recorded and the material will be made available for future watching. Again, we will hold a public comment session at the end of today's agenda at approximately 12:15 p.m. If members of the public prefer to submit a formal written comment, they may do so online via the docket proceeding at any time. A link to the docket was included in the agenda that circulated, and it's also on the presentation slides, which will be made available to everybody. Finally, no decisions are being made today, nor actions will be taken. This will be an open discussion venue to learn about and further understand SoCalGas and Sempra's proposed safety and culture improvement plan. You can go to the next slide. So we are moving on to our next section of the workshop. I will now turn it over to Commissioner Hauk for opening remarks. Commissioner Hauk, would you like to share your opening remarks?
Thank you, Carolina. I wanted to thank Commissioner Rechtschaffen for his leadership in this proceeding and to thank our Safety Policy Division staff and Carolina for your facilitation today. I'm looking forward to hearing the presentations, especially the Safety Culture Implementation Plan submitted by SoCalGas. And I'm also interested in hearing how specifically the Commission can hold SoCalGas and Sempra accountable to resolve the issues identified in the report that they submitted on July 29th. Discussion regarding the metrics that they'll be looking at to ensure that there's a way to evaluate their performance. The discussion today should include a focus on public safety as well as worker safety, and I'm interested in how SoCalGas and Sempra plan to go beyond just compliance with laws and rules, and how they will move forward toward a more holistic embrace of safety at all levels of business. Safety culture requires a cultural shift, and I'm interested in understanding how the company has and will undergo changes to get to a point where their safety culture permeates the entire organization. And with that, we'll conclude my comments.
Thank you, Commissioner Haug. President Reynolds, are there any opening remarks you would like to share today?
Sure. Thank you very much, Carolina. Just briefly, good morning, everyone. I'm really pleased to be here at this workshop and to receive the briefing from Southern California Gas and Sempra on their proposed safety culture improvement plan. As you've heard, the proceeding is CPUC's investigation and how these utilities prioritize safety in their organization's culture and governance. Safety culture is something that is critically important, but also very difficult to do well. I think this is something that we've been struggling with at the Commission, and I think this proceeding is a very important place to examine a lot of difficult issues. Values, attitudes, accountability can all be hard to quantify, and safety absolutely cannot be a check the box exercise. So that is why this proceeding is important. We need to have an organizational-wide conversation, we need to make sure that happens, and a process to continually introduce and ingrain safety, as well as organizational culture. So today in this proceeding, I'm really hoping to learn how Southern California Gas and Sempra plan to do this and how they plan to respond to the areas that need attention. Some of those areas were detailed in the independent safety culture assessment done by the Evolving Energy Consortium, a contractor for the Safety Policy Division. And I'm looking forward to hearing the specifics of the plan and how the plan was developed and how it will be reviewed and reassessed as lessons are learned. And I'd like to hear what SoCalGas and Sempra think about their biggest challenges and how they plan to address them. As Commissioner Haug suggested, safety culture is something that must be infused throughout the organization, and I hope to hear today how safety culture is addressed in the actions and considerations and processes of top management, as well as employees, contractors, and interactions with customers and the public. I also want to thank the Safety Policy Division, especially Carolina Contreras, for their work in facilitating this workshop. I want to thank Commissioner Rechtschaffen and Commissioner Haug and ALJ Klein for their leadership in advancing and steering the investigative proceeding, as well as the CPUC staff who assist and the parties to the proceeding too. So with that, I'm really excited to be here and looking forward to the workshop. Thank you.
Thank you, President Reynolds. Commissioner Shiroma, do you have any opening remarks would you like to share with us today?
Yes, thank you, Carolina, and to you and the safety team, to Commissioner Rechtschaffen, Commissioner Haug, commissioners who are providing leadership on this proceeding. Simply put, a strong safety culture must be the foundation for every entity we regulate. And building and maintaining a safety culture requires constant effort and attention. I hope that today we can learn about SoCalGas's active steps, results to date, and future plans to improve its safety culture in response to the safety culture assessment issued earlier this year. I look forward to a detailed and thoughtful discussion. Thank you. Back to you, Carolina.
Thank you, Commissioner Shiroma. Commissioner Reynolds, if you have any opening remarks, please go ahead.
Thank you, Carolina. Just briefly, I'd also like to thank the Safety Policy Division, and thank you to Commissioners Haug and Rechtschaffen for their leadership in this area. And I'll echo the remarks of my colleagues. Safety culture ultimately is really about a whole of organization effort to identify safety risks and mitigate them to the greatest extent possible. I look forward to learning more about SoCalGas's implementation, its proposals for improving upon its safety culture, and I particularly am looking forward to learning more about its implementation of a safety management system. I I look forward to this workshop, and I will be in and out, but we'll be following up on the video, and my staff will be present as well.
Thank you, Commissioner Reynolds. We can, and thank you all commissioners for your opening remarks. We can go to the next slide, please. So I will now provide a brief recap of the proceeding assisted by Dr. Fleming, who will present a brief refresher of the issues contained in the TUEC report. Dr. Fleming is SPD subject matter advisor for phase 2 and a member of the TUEC team that conducted the safety culture assessment in phase 1. We can go ahead to the next slide. Thank you. Phase 1 of this investigation produced a safety culture assessment report by TUEC. That was issued back in January, along with a workshop where TUEC presented the results and findings of the assessment. For reference, a recording of the workshop is available on the CPUC's website and under the Safety Policies Division Safety Culture and Governance page, which many of you probably don't know exists, but it's a great area for resources and reference material on safety culture as well. We will provide that link to that page in the slides towards the end, but we'll also post it on the chat in case anybody needs it. Phase 2, which is the current phase of the investigation, is centered on SoCalGas producing a safety culture improvement plan. This improvement plan was submitted 2 weeks ago in response to the scoping memo issued on April 27th. The scoping memo requires the safety culture improvement plan to address areas of improvement identified in the TUEC report. The scoping memo adopted 6 issues related to the adequacy of the plan, implementation accountability, and cost recovery. It also adopted a set of principles and elements intended to guide and set expectations for the plan, and established the use of consultants to support SPD and SoCalGas in phase 2. As I mentioned, the plan was filed 2 weeks ago and is the subject of today's workshop. Opening comments on the 6 issues in the proceeding are due 30 days after today's workshop. By my calculations, that falls on September 16th. ALJ client, if you understand differently, please do correct me. And reply comments are due 20 days after that on October 6th. I believe those land on a Friday and Thursday, respectively. We can change the slide. So here we have the scoping items for your reference, which I won't go over in detail, but essentially items on the left-hand side are the scoping items on the slide you see at the screen. Essentially, items 1 and 2 consider the adequacy of the plan in addressing the issues in the report. Items 3, 4, and 6 address implementation and accountability by considering progress metrics, consequences for failure to meet proposed improvements, and considering flexibility to change the plan. Item 5 considers the question of cost recovery for assessing, developing, and implementing the plan. Now, item 2 considers whether the plan meets a set of principles and elements that were adopted in the scoping memo. The elements are shown on the right of the slide. In the interest of time, again, I won't go through them all, but they essentially provide for some structure to the plan, establish fundamental features, and require certain content like costs and timelines, and set the intent for the plan. For example, items 1 and 2 request that the plan directly respond to the issues found in the report, both through the improvements it proposes and more generally by SoCalGas and Sempra as organizations. Element 4, for example, requests that the plan lay out the key steps the IOU will take to develop a systemic approach to safety. Systemic approach to safety is one of the principles adopted for the plan and refers to considering the complex set of interactions between human, organizational, and technical factors that are the center of the utilities work. This should not be confused, though, with systemic, which refers to a methodical approach to doing something, even though, this methodical approach is also part of the other elements, and it's also a significant contributor to the essence of what the plan should be doing. So element 3, highlighted in green, adopts a certain set of principles which were contained in the scoping memo as well. So we can go ahead and change the slide. So here you see the principles referred to in element 3, and these principles can be seen more as like the general spirit that the plan should reflect. They address adopting a systemic approach to safety through principles A and C, continued improvement through a methodical or systematic structure, again, not systemic, but systematic. This is under items D, E, and G. Leadership engagement, commitment, and accountability, also under G. Broad engagement of stakeholders to develop a strategy that is based on a deep understanding of the issues, that's under E. And it emphasizes communication throughout the organization under item H. Again, these are very high level and broad and intended that it looks to provide room for improvement and in the plan. We can change the slide. Thank you. So in terms of the 3C report, the assessment identified issues with both SoCalGas and Sempra in the form of 4 overarching themes that were supported by over 150 cultural facts or areas in need of attention. There were also positive areas that were identified for the utility to leverage in its improvement. The assessment also presented issues in the form of how SoCalGas's safety culture compares to a healthy safety culture by using the 10 traits of the USNRC's normative framework. I will now turn it over to Dr. Fleming, who will provide a brief refresher of the issues identified in the 3C report for your reference. Dr. Fleming, over to you.
Thanks, Carolina. My name is Dr. Mark Fleming. I'm a faculty member in St. Mary's University in Nova Scotia, in Canada, and I've been working on safety culture for 30 years, and I was one of the team members conducting the assessment under 2EC. I think it will be helpful now just to give a little bit more detail about the report. The safety culture assessment conducted by 2EC produced a very rich picture of the safety culture at SoCalGas and Sempra, and has a large amount of information contained within the report. So it's quite tricky to provide a succinct summary. But the information was gathered, was summarized into 4 main overarching themes. And the first one of these is that within SoCalGas and Sempra, safety is most often perceived as personnel safety rather than necessarily a broader view, which would include public safety, for example. And underneath this element, there was a lot of information contained within it. And one of the elements was that it's important for leaders at SoCalGas and Sempra to demonstrate their commitment to public safety and spend time talking about public safety and promoting it. Also that there's some potential risks associated with having a more narrow view of safety, particularly if it's used as an indicator for safety performance as a whole, as it may result in complacency, so people feel that they're safer than they are in reality, because personnel safety tends to have frequent injuries that we tend to have that are low consequence, but frequent, while really from a public safety perspective, they tend to be less frequent, so low probability, but much higher consequence. And therefore, it's important that we look at both sides of safety and not rely overly on personnel safety as the way we think and talk about safety within the organization. And also this issue, this theme included concerns that people had about a disconnect between management view of safety and employees' view of safety issues. So they had very different views of what the safety challenges were. So this is a broad theme and important. A second theme was safety and risk are perceived as achieved by compliance. And this looked had a number of different sort of components to it as well. So it was a broad idea that often the focus for SoCalGas and Sempra is it being compliant with legislation rather than necessarily managing risk. And also a belief that managing safety was really involved people complying with rules. So if everybody complied with the rules, things would be safe. And while rule compliance is important in safety, it's not everything. So those are important components Also that there was not a systemic approach to risk management, and that information tended to be siloed, and different approaches to safety tend to sort of live within different groups rather than looking at it from an overall or overarching perspective or holistic approach. Again, compliance focus rather than continuous improvement focus. And also again, encouraging and drawing on employees for safety improvement would be another issue that was identified in this area. Next slide, please. The third theme was a need for resources to promote a positive, healthy safety culture. So there's a need for leaders to demonstrate their commitment to safety through the resources that they allocate. Staff members reported having concerns about staffing levels, which again sends the wrong signal around the priority for safety. And there was a belief among some staff members that management incentives did not promote a positive safety culture. So a lot of what this theme was about how resources are being allocated and how that sends inconsistent signals to employees. And then finally, the fourth one was the learning and safety improvement requirements and more of an integrated management approach, this more holistic approach. And this is really about building up more of a learning organization and being more self-critical and systemic in their approach to safety. So that's a sort of a very quick overview of those sort of main findings. I would recommend that people look at the report, as it provides a lot more detail about the underlying cultural facts that support these broad themes. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Fleming, and I echo Dr. Fleming's view in that there's a lot more information in the report. This is sort of a simplified a view of the findings in order to be able to digest and provide some context to today's presentations and discussion. So we can go ahead to the next slide. Great. So we will now share a presentation from SoCalGas and Sempra on their proposed safety culture improvement plan. I will turn it over to SoCalGas and Sempra's representatives. I'm not sure who wants to go ahead, but I'll turn over to Mr. Jason Egan.
Thanks, Carolina. I'll start things off. My name is Cedric Williams, and I'm the Chief Safety Officer for SoCalGas. I have over 32 years of experience in the utility industry at every level, from frontline worker to now senior executive. I really appreciate the opportunity to answer questions and give some deeper insight into our safety culture improvement plan. Safety is a core value at SoCalGas, and we also understand that part of our continuing to grow and become even safer is seeking out opportunities for improvement. This is why we embrace continuous improvement as a fundamental pillar of our safety programs and our safety management system values. As part of our path to our plan submittal, we were very intentional about communicating the findings of the 2EC assessment with our employees at every level, with our contractor partners, and key constituencies of the public to solicit feedback and to share high-level plans for action. We've absorbed the results, insights, and reflections from the 2EC report and from assessments initiated by SoCalGas as part of our ongoing continuous improvement mindset. And since the start of the OII, we've already implemented measures based on these independent observations. A few examples of this are that we've created a standalone Chief Safety Officer position, establishing a dedicated senior executive who is solely focused on all aspects of safety. We are better integrating our risk management activities to leverage existing data and enhance how all of our employees understand and talk about risk. And we've enhanced our management of change process to promote consistent understanding, use, and implementation of any change with safety implications. As this team went about developing this plan, we did not treat addressing 2EC's assessment as a check-the-box exercise. We really took seriously 2EC's counsel about focusing on making this effort one that would produce lasting change instead of a compliance-based effort that would likely fail to produce the intended cultural evolution we're looking for. For those who have had a chance to read our plan, we think it is objectively detailed and robust. We've leaned into the study of current academic thought about safety management and safety culture and incorporated some of those concepts into our plan. Things like the adoption of human and organizational performance principles, which focuses on the fact that human error is normal and systems must be designed to fail safely. Also characteristics of learning organizations, systems and organizational learning to continuously learn, improve, and transform. And then finally, concepts around high reliability organizations with a preoccupation of failure and focusing on weak signals and a commitment to resilience. We've designed this plan to be safety facilitated, but operations led, as is evident by the attendance of this workshop by several executives at our company who will be championing work streams that make up this plan. There are several overarching efforts that are intended to support and facilitate the work streams and initiatives that are part of this plan, including a robust change management strategy, enterprise-wide change management focused to implement and sustain the culture change that we're implementing, a robust communications and engagement strategy, a strong accountability model, developing metrics and milestones and future assessment activities or checks to track progress. This will allow us to hold ourselves accountable for delivery and also provide a straightforward mechanism for the commission to hold us to what we said we would do. And finally, strong reporting, creating reports that have detailed metrics, progress milestones, and provide a narrative of our planned implementation, feedback, and refinement as we go through the process. So to dive deeper into our plan, I will hand off to Jason Egan, who is the program director for our safety culture improvement effort. Jason.
We can move on to the next slide, Jeff. Thank you. Good morning. As mentioned, I'm a director. I apologize. I'm getting an echo on my end.
Yes, Jason, I think you are. Perhaps it's a matter of muting one of the devices.
Let me test that and see if that's any better.
Yep, loud and clear.
Perfect. Thank you so much. As Cedric mentioned, I'm a director in our safety organization and will be leading our safety culture improvement efforts. Our intent today is to provide an overview of our safety culture improvement plan, discuss some of the relevant concepts that influenced our approach, and then detail the implementation structure, the specific work streams, the initiatives that are underlying those work streams, and then go into some specifics on the accountability model. So that's the metrics, the milestones, the indicators, the reporting that Cedric mentioned. And while walking through the materials, I will plan to identify and describe how our approach addresses the commission's scoping requirements and elements that Carolina walked us through earlier. We did provide a more detailed discussion of these requirements in our filing, but I will try to take the time today to flag and specifically identify where those elements are intended to be addressed by our plan. You can go to the next slide. So consistent with our company mission, Safety Forward is a comprehensive company-wide commitment to further SoCalGas's safety culture. It's designed and intended to build upon our learning and continuous improvement values and looks to realize innovative safety changes and enhancements for the benefit of the public, our customers, our contractors, and our employees. And I'll start with that framing, and then from there, Jeff, maybe we could go to the next slide. And I did want to provide some initial background on SoCalGas's safety journey. Safety, continuous improvement, learning are foundational at SoCalGas. Safety assessments, feedback, benchmarking have been and are essential growth and continuous improvement tools and opportunities that have enabled us to innovate and adopt new approaches in the past and in the future. So this is a brief overview of the last decade plus or so of safety changes, improvements at SoCalGas. And while this mindset extends back much farther than this, we thought it was helpful to highlight some of the recent improvements that have changed and enhanced our approach to safety. Cedric mentioned some of them earlier. I was going to go back a little bit further just to identify some of the things that years ago might have been new, but now are just part of how we operate, and some have become more widely adopted across the industry. That includes things like establishing an executive safety council, which we did over a decade ago, began assessing safety culture through the National Safety Council Safety Barometer Survey back in 2013, and we've been doing that in an ongoing cycle. We began holding employee safety congresses over a decade ago, and more recently, about 7 years ago, we extended that out to also hold contractor safety congresses. And then we also established our safety management system based on API Recommended Practice 1173. We took API 1173 and customized it to be more comprehensive, to better customize and personalize for SoCalGas's use. And then last year, we had API come in to assess our SMS and identify how we were implementing SMS relative to the recommended practice. And wanted to provide that background. We're constantly looking to learn, innovate, advance safety, and our safety culture improvement plan, which we're calling Safety Forward, is another example of that forward-looking, innovative mindset. We can go to the next slide. And Dr. Fleming already covered this in much more detail, but I will just at a high level say that this investigation was opened in 2019. As part of the investigation, the 2EC team was identified by Safety Policy Division to assess SoCalGas and Sempra safety culture. In assessing that safety culture, 2EC defined safety culture. They included a couple of definitions. I like the shorter one they provided, which is the shared values, attitudes, beliefs, perceptions, and behavioral norms related to risk and safety. Based on that definition, the 2EC team engaged in significant interviews, focus groups, surveys, job and meeting observations, document review to highlight cultural facts. So their observations, their perceptions from employees, beliefs that they identified, norms, identified values throughout the organization. And they used this to identify areas that represented strengths that could be built upon or represented opportunities for improvement. Then, as Dr. Fleming indicated, all of these cultural facts and information were kind of focused into 4 themes, which are identified at the bottom of this slide. And SoCalGas took the 2EC assessment and used that to focus our continuous learning and improvement activities and developed the Safety Culture Improvement Plan, or Safety Forward, to not only respond to the 2EC observations, but build on employee feedback, comments, and observations to create an organizational-wide, enterprise-wide safety culture improvement, change, learning endeavor. You can go to the next slide, please. As Carolina mentioned, we submitted our plan on July 29th, and that plan describes our proposed multi-year effort to enhance our safety culture, consistent with the requirement that our plan consider and adopt a systematic approach to safety. Our plan outlines a structured, systematic approach to learning and continuous improvement, detailing our efforts to create a shared vision for our culture, specifying responsibilities within the organization, creating specific plans and actions, providing a process for ongoing assessment, progress, and then also engaging in sustainment and ongoing continuous improvement activities. And our plan design also represents a systemic approach in that it is designed to learn and continuously improve cross-functionally, so at an enterprise and organizational level. And to frame and promote these efforts, SoCalGas provided its vision for its safety culture, highlighting learning, continuous improvement, and risk management as fundamental to our commitment to safety for the public, the environment, our system, and each other. Go to the next slide. Also, as indicated in the scoping ruling, our plan is goal-oriented. It's designed to grow and improve based on the 2EC report. We have identified 5 overall objectives for our plan. These objectives align with the 5 work streams that I will get into in a bit later. And really, they're intended to promote and reinforce our commitment to safety. And it's consistent with these requirements that our improvements also align with the 2EC assessment themes. The first 4 objectives, or the first 4 work streams are generally consistent with the 4 themes identified in the 2EC assessment. Plus, we've identified a 5th objective in work stream focused on maturing as a learning organization. And I'll now pass to Helena Caravello with the National Safety Council. Helena and NSC have provided extensive insight, guidance, and support into our plan development. We asked Helena to present today on some of the important safety concepts and philosophies that have helped us think about these change and continuous improvement opportunities.
Thank you, Jason. If we can go to the next slide. Great, thanks. So Cedric already mentioned the topics, the main areas that I'm going to cover just very quickly, interrelated concepts. These are the ones that we use to help inform the development of the SoCalGas Safety Forward Plan. So as you can see on this slide, human and organizational performance, or HOP. HOP really is just an operating philosophy that's focused on understanding how humans, or otherwise known as employees, how they perform and interact with organizational requirements to enable a more resilient operating system, a more resilient company. On this slide, you can see the 5 overarching tenets of HOP, such as, and I'm going to highlight this a few times, learning as a key driver of improvements. When Jason reviews the plan later in the session, you'll see that learning is a major component of the plan, not only in its own work stream, but within the other work streams as well. And then the other tenets of HOP are also woven into this plan as well. On the next slide, we actually take a look at some of the concepts of a learning organization. Learning, as you just heard, is directly referenced in the SoCalGas vision, as is the desire to evolve the existing learning processes to advance safety culture and resiliency. Being open to learning throughout the organization will be very important. And there are a variety of interrelated aspects that define learning organizations, and this slide simply illustrates a common set, elements that we've included. Moving on to the next slide. This slide illustrates the tenets of high reliability organizations, or HROs. And these are organizations that operate in a high risk environment, a high risk context, but they manage to operate safely because they build in controls and learning processes so that errors are reduced and the resiliency of the organization is increased. HROs continuously work to embrace all of the elements that are shown on this slide, and the Safety Forward Plan serves to strengthen these elements at SoCalGas. And then finally, to the next slide, and to highlight the consistency of these interrelated and influential concepts, we've combined the key themes that have helped move us through the plan creation process. For example, recognizing the importance of dialogue in understanding patterns and interrelationships that can influence a system's approach to safety is one of those areas that we have highlighted. Acknowledging that employee dialogue, and in fact, employees themselves are a deep source of work knowledge. Of course, these are elements that are part of both HOP and learning organizations. Further, moving from the common tendency to assign blame for errors to a place of learning from events and increasing resiliency is going to be critical to the improvements that are put in place at SoCalGas. And both of these, of course, are fundamental to HOP and learning organizations, and they underpin successful HROs. Finally, increasing an organization's capacity for dealing with complex risk from a variety of operations and focusing on the importance of a leader's influence on safety culture are efforts that are woven throughout this plan as well. And so we use these concepts and will continue to use these concepts to help SoCalGas execute on their Safety Forward Plan. And with this brief overview, I'm going to turn it back over to Jason to give you the details of the plan.
Perfect. Thank you, Helena. And we can go to the next slide. The remaining slides are really going to focus some time discussing our plan implementation, the plan delivery model, and the plan structure. Starting here, to support implementation, we've developed an organizational and plan delivery model with significant and valuable clear leadership engagement, commitment, and accountability at various levels and aspects of the plan program structure. First, it has plan-wide executive oversight and support through the Chief Safety Officer and SoCalGas's Executive Safety Council. At a plan level, coordination and strategy will be delivered by the SoCalGas Project Management Office or Transformation Office and the Program Director, myself and my team. The Transformation Office and my team will be looking to strategically coordinate and support across the various initiatives and work streams and try to drive and manage program level efforts. So that would be things like program change management, communications, and the various components of the accountability model. So the identification of metrics, the milestone tracking of milestones, development of indicators, and then the creation and distribution of reports. Looking more specifically at the work streams, which we will get into a bit more detail on. For each work stream, a SoCalGas executive is sponsoring and leading implementation. And then for each initiative, an initiative lead and team will be identified from across the enterprise to lead and manage the initiative. Here too, this is kind of an effort to cross-functionally make sure that we're identifying sponsorship, leadership, engagement on all of these various work streams and initiatives. And finally, on the right of the table, we do have support from the National Safety Council and our Project Management Office consultant partner. And not illustrated here, but a key component that I believe Stacy will cover in more detail is Sempra will continue to provide support, oversight, and governance consistent with their safety culture oversight and initiatives. And if we go to the next slide, now getting into a little bit more detail on the safety forward work streams. So these are the 5 work streams or the 5 groupings of actions or initiatives that make up safety forward or the safety culture improvement plan. Within each of these work streams, there are 2, 3, 4 specific initiatives that are intended to identify more targeted opportunities for action, learning, improvement. These work streams directly align with our plan objectives, which, as I mentioned earlier, are consistent with and responsive to the 2EC assessment. And as indicated here, and as Cedric mentioned earlier, we have identified 5 executive sponsors who are sponsoring, managing, leading these work streams and represent cross-functional leadership, lead significant organizations within the enterprise representing significant and large employee populations. So for work stream 1, drive a holistic view of safety, that will be sponsored by our VP of Gas Distribution. For work stream 2, enhanced dynamic risk assessment capability, that will be sponsored by our VP of Risk Management and Chief Risk Officer. For work stream 3, optimized safety operating model, it will be sponsored by our VP of Supply Chain and Operations Support. For work stream 4, enhancing safety management system integration, it will be sponsored by our VP of Construction. And then finally, for work stream 5, maturing as a learning organization, that will be sponsored by our Vice President of Customer Service. We could go to the next slide, Joe. From here, I'll cover a few of what I'll call the program level or plan level activities, and then transition back into some more specifics on the work streams and initiatives. So the next few slides will look at some of the activities that we're looking to undertake from a consistent programmatic level. That's enterprise-wide, organizational-wide. The first is change management. Briefly, change management is designed and intended to facilitate how an organization adopts change, and it's done that by supporting the employee through the transition. So with an effort like this that's intended to be organization-wide and reach a significant number of employees, change management is a real essential and fundamental component of how we can make that change effective. It's included in more detail in our plan, but our plan describes our enterprise-wide change management strategies with focus on implementing and sustaining cultural change. This includes, for example, active and visible leadership commitment and sponsorship of the change. That can be seen through the engagement of the Chief Safety Officer, the Executive Safety Council, the executive sponsors, as well as through ongoing leader and executive engagement and support in the communication strategy. Another example is looking at how you can identify and either remove or mitigate barriers to adopting the change. So here we plan to foster two-way communication to bring forth critical intelligence, build collaboration, and then also look at how we can diagnose potential barriers, understand why these barriers are there, understand why there are resistance, and then see how we can overcome that resistance, mitigate that resistance, or modify our approach so that we can get around the resistance and realize change. And consistent with the requirements from the commission, our change management approach is also looking at how we can effectively integrate these efforts into our processes and plans. And then I'll say more specifically, there are several initiatives within the work streams that are very focused on integration. So how can we integrate our change efforts into relevant governance, management systems, policies, processes, and plans? So it's an intentional focus not only on the change, but how we can integrate that change into the systems, integrate that change into the enterprise and into the organization in a real foundational way to make sure that the change is adopted, it is seen throughout, and it is effective. Go to the next slide, please. Transitioning now to our communication strategy. Another element from the commission scoping ruling was to make sure that the plan is widely communicated and understood. So our communication strategy is a very key component of that. We have been communicating the 2EC assessment as well as our early safety culture improvement plan development efforts throughout the organization with other external stakeholders. And through these efforts, the intent is to make sure that our efforts reflect a shared understanding of both the assessment as well as what we're trying to accomplish. So we've communicated to stakeholders about the assessment, our early development efforts of the plan. We plan to engage in multiple and regular communication and engagement activities. Our focus is going to be on two-way communication, so dialogues, opportunities for feedback loops. Information is coming in, information is responded to, but it becomes a very clear and intentional opportunity to gather information and then communicate back out about our efforts, the plan, and what we're trying to accomplish. And then also looking at how we can integrate our safety forward messaging, our safety forward efforts, objectives, activities into a wide range of communication activities throughout the organization. So looking at how we can incorporate safety forward into other ongoing communications channels, how it can become part of other messaging with the organization. So it's tough to, whenever you open something up, you're going to see a hint of safety forward in it. It's going to be something that is seen throughout the organization and communications. When we're looking at how we can accomplish this, there's a range of potential activities. Again, in our plan itself, it details out a lot of these and with more specifics, but we envision it will have in-person and virtual dialogues, smaller meetings, town halls, email communications, internet articles, particular focus on the dialogue. So the in-person virtual meetings, visiting bases, looking at training, looking at ongoing communications. And as I've indicated earlier, part of this will include a branded effort to help drive engagement, and that will be safety forward. Go to the next slide, please. To provide and we can go to the next slide actually. So the intent here is to provide a bit more detail on the initiatives associated with each work stream. This is a more detailed view of the work streams and initiatives. I will say there is an appendix that has much more detail on the initiatives. I'm looking at the screen now and realize that is small font, but the first appendix has a one-pager for each initiative, which provides some detail on what the initiative is, what the intended benefits are, and what the intended actions are. And I'll add, looking at this, the 5 work streams and the 15 underlying initiatives, we've identified separate work streams and initiatives to help facilitate an orderly, structured implementation of these actions. But the work streams and initiatives are intentionally interconnected and focused on achieving our vision and our objectives. So they're identified as separate initiatives or separate work streams, but there is clear overlap, there is consistency, and there is kind of an intentional push forward on these continuous improvement and learning activities. There are many of the work streams when we're looking at these two, and the next slide will indicate that will be ongoing at the same time. We've identified a preliminary roadmap that illustrates how we think these initiatives could effectively proceed, beginning with some of the early initiatives that we think provide foundational value. So learning about concepts, engaging in broad dialogues at the leadership level throughout the organization, really driving alignment on direction, understanding of the assessment, understanding of concepts, support, and excitement for the change. So looking first at work stream 1, this work stream is very focused on organizational dialogues, communications, and engagement. The goal of this work stream is to build a comprehensive understanding of safety across the organization and incorporate these comprehensive concepts of safety into existing or new processes, training, and policies. The work stream involves a large and inclusive process throughout the organization, and it's designed to enable dialogues to really facilitate discussion and ultimately drive alignment. Workstream 2, enhancing dynamic risk assessment capability, is looking to expand risk assessment capabilities to promote more conversations, more active and collaborative management of risk. So it's intended to enhance and evolve our risk assessment approach and capabilities with an emphasis on expanding how we learn and improve and manage risk. So empowering and enabling employees to more actively manage risk, identify risks, and look to mitigate those risks. Workstream 3 is evaluative in nature. It's looking to evaluate and then enhance our safety operating model. So being self-reflective, being self-critical, evaluating our current systems and resources to make sure that we're set up to achieve our safety goals. The initiatives identified in this work stream are designed to introduce additional checks on our systems and processes, engage additional expertise as it relates to systemic safety and safety culture, evaluate resource allocations, and evaluate safety capabilities. And workstream 4, also looking at evaluating our existing safety management system, looking to identify opportunities to integrate SMS in a stronger way throughout the organization, looking to expand SMS. So taking a step back and looking for opportunities to increase how our safety management system is integrated, first by expanding data gathering, and then second by looking at how we kind of integrate those activities throughout the organization. So expanding data gathering and integration, and then enhanced learning and facilitate greater opportunity to improve once you have that kind of expanded and enhanced integration of your safety management system. And then finally, workstream 5 is training and learning oriented. So here we're looking to enhance the tools that facilitate knowledge transfer and foster a more collaborative learning environment. Here, the training is looking at organization level training, leadership training, developing a curriculum for executive training that could then be used for additional training throughout the organization. And then similar to work streams 3 and 4, also doing some evaluation of our existing learning processes to see if there are opportunities to enhance how we learn as an organization. Go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So we expect that the initiatives will continue to evolve, that once we have initiative leads and initiative teams on board, that part of their activities will be identifying and understanding the right schedule and timing. That said, we did prepare a preliminary roadmap of the initiatives. So to accomplish this, we profiled each initiative to outline key outcomes, determine overall complexity, and identify dependencies. And then we wanted to put it into kind of a Gantt chart view so you could get a sense of the activities involved across the proposed life of the project, about 24 months. After 24 months, we expect ongoing sustainment, ongoing learning, continuous improvement. And as indicated in the bottom blue line, we are proposing and expect that the program level activities, program level communications, change management, our proposed reporting would continue over that same 24-month period. So this is intended to be kind of a step back view of what the work streams, what the initiatives would look like if you were to take it out over the life of the Safety Forward initiative. We go to the next slide, and I think we can go right to 22. And so we'll close out by providing some information on our proposed accountability model. And what we're calling the accountability model really is comprised of the milestones, the metrics, the indicators, future assessments, and our proposed reporting. And the intent here is to facilitate, provide for, enable ongoing review and monitoring of our plan implementation, its progress, its effectiveness. And these components are intended to enable not only SoCalGas to measure progress, identify opportunities to refine and improve and sustain and improve the changes, but also provide visibility to stakeholders and facilitate commission collaboration and oversight. So starting at the top, we intend to track several milestones, metrics, and indicators related to both the plan as an enterprise-wide change effort, as well as the specific work streams and initiatives. The metrics, measures, and milestones and future assessment activities are checks to track progress. And we're also proposing a future, more comprehensive assessment. We provide a bit more detail on this in the filing, but what we're looking at for that assessment is that it would have pulse checks occurring, surveys occurring, focus groups occurring, but at a future date, there would be a future comprehensive assessment. And depending on timing, that could be consistent with the structure being developed in the separate safety culture assessment rulemaking. And also using these different tools, these different components, and following the plan, do, check, adjust model to allow for learning and continuous improvement. The intent is to have in place mechanisms and processes that will allow us to incorporate and respond to feedback to refine the plan. So as this data is coming in and we're collecting it, the intent is to use this to understand where we might need to be flexible, where we might need to adjust, where we're being effective and where there might be lessons learned from that effectiveness, or where there's areas in need of attention or opportunities for more focus. And to provide a bit more specifics on the reporting, we are proposing to create a report that details the metrics, the measures, the progress, and also includes a narrative of plan implementation that would detail out the feedback we've received through the assessments, any planned, proposed, or implemented refinement to the initiatives or work streams. And then these reports would go to the CPUC, to the employees, to our contractors, to the public. The intent is that these reports become a tool to enable transparency in what's occurring, and then also facilitate asking of questions. And if we go to the last slide. And here we just wanted to provide a bit more information on the accountability model. So this table is intended to describe the different components that were listed in the slide before, the purpose of those components, and then identify some examples that we've identified so far. I will add, especially for the initiatives, our intent is to work with the initiative leads to see if there are also any initiative level data that would be appropriate to start gathering and collecting prior to launching that initiative that might be a helpful tool in measuring progress, measuring effectiveness, measuring direction. Overall, the intent of the milestones, metrics, indicators, and assessments is really threefold. It's reinforce the importance of the effort by tracking progress and effectiveness so that we can communicate it internally and externally to stakeholders, promoting dialogue on status, progress, results, what we're seeing, what's working, where we're seeing change, celebrate successes, identify opportunities to continue to improve, and then identify and mitigate risks such as initiatives falling behind schedule or resistance to change, which I discussed around the change management efforts. And then finally, and importantly, to facilitate ongoing learning and improvement. So the intent is, as this data is coming in, it's going to create more information, more knowledge about how the work streams are moving, how the initiatives are moving, how the plan is moving, and it'll give us an opportunity to continue to learn, to continue to improve, and to continue to make sure that this is an effective progress. So again, the approach is designed to support plan implementation. It's designed to promote transparency, and it's designed to promote ongoing collaboration with important stakeholders. And with that, I'll turn it over to Cedric if you had any closing remarks.
Yeah, is Sempra gonna chime in?
Oh, I can go to Sempra.
Yeah.
Yeah. Excuse me, I think then it'll go to Stacy.
Okay, thank you, Jason.
Yes, Utah submitted one plan. Stacy, you may go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I'm wondering if Jeff can help bring up my presentation for me. I'm not technologically capable of talking and navigating that at the same time. Thank you, Jeff. Okay, we can turn to the first page. This is obviously just our cover. Next slide, please. Okay, so Sempra Safety Oversight Initiatives has two components, as we outlined in our filing on July 29th. The first is that we support the gas company's plan in Sempra's oversight and governance capacity. There are formal and informal ways that Sempra will do that. We provide formal oversight through our officers that sit on SoCalGas's board of directors and through the Safety, Sustainability, and Technology Committee, the SST, of the Sempra Board of Directors. And then the companies also work together informally in a working capacity. Secondly, Sempra has its own initiatives with respect to 2EC's guidance that was specific to Sempra. Sempra is engaging an outside expert in safety culture as recommended by 2EC, and the goal is to expand employees' vision of safety and to promote that vision within Sempra and to Sempra's subsidiary companies. Next slide. Getting into the formal oversight and governance with a little more detail, SoCalGas's board of directors, currently the Sempra officers that serve on SoCalGas's board of directors include Sempra's group president for the California utilities, Sempra's chief administrative officer and chief human resources officer, and the senior vice president of corporate affairs. These officers are providing oversight and governance on behalf of Sempra. And then, as I mentioned, also we have the SST committee, and the purpose of this committee is in part to oversee, quote, the corporation's risk management and oversight programs and performance related to environmental health and safety, security, technology, climate change, sustainability, and other related ESG matters affecting the corporation. The SST charter has been modified, edited to specifically call out safety culture, and then that change is going to be formally adopted at the next SST meeting. SoCalGas has presented its plans, its culture improvement plans, to this committee and will provide written updates regarding implementation. Currently, the committee meets 4 times a year. That, of course, could change, but right now it's 4 times a year. Next slide. So oversight and governance informal methods. Now, this is just a small subset of things that we do to communicate with the gas company about culture, safety culture. But Sempra and SoCalGas employees talk regularly. Sempra is holding the next Leadership Safety Summit in September. This involves leaders from Sempra and its subsidiaries, and the focus on this summit is safety culture. The 2EC report has been shared with the SST, top Sempra leadership, and broadly across Sempra, SoCalGas, and SDG&E. We've also shared it with SDG&E leadership for lessons learned. We are working on a safety culture intranet page. It's under development now to promote learnings and transparency. The 2EC report will be there for all employees to see, and it will also include information about safety culture and improvements and initiatives. Next slide. Getting into the 2EC report guidance relating to Sempra in particular, Dr. Fleming talked about the various findings in the 2EC report. That was addressing the report in its entirety, but Sempra in particular is distinguishable from the gas company in many areas in the report. The 2EC report guidance for Sempra included 1, developing a shared understanding of a robust concept of safety and risk through dialogues with board directors and executives that is facilitated by external and independent experts familiar with a comprehensive perspective on safety and safety culture. 2, to develop and communicate the updated broader vision of safety. This new vision should explain how the revised approach differs from previous approach and implemented in the governance process. And 3, provide training on a more comprehensive concept of safety and safety culture to the organization through facilitated sessions. Next slide. And so we have taken, Sempra has taken TUEC's recommendations to heart in its effort to continuously learn and improve. So we will have consultant support. Sempra has engaged the Propolo firm to help Sempra address the TUEC report. The work has 4 phases, and it's detailed in the further slides by Propolo. And so we can move on to the next slide. I can get into more detail below. Commission criteria. The commission identified 11 criteria for SoCalGas's safety culture plan. Not all of these criteria apply to Sempra per footnote 3 of the scoping ruling. Nonetheless, in Sempra's oversight and governance role, we will be touching on all 11 criteria with respect to the gas company, and Sempra's own initiatives satisfy the criteria relevant to Sempra. Most importantly, Sempra is hiring an expert, has hired an expert in safety culture to help implement the TUEC report as it pertains to Sempra. And in particular, the consultant will work with Sempra to develop and communicate a shared mental model vision for safety with senior executive buy-in, develop leadership embedding tools to support the change journey, work with corporate communications to develop a series of communication campaigns to introduce and communicate the changes, review and update charters for key governance forums as needed, and advise on procedures to provide oversight and synchronizing activities with SoCalGas and its safety culture development plan. I have even further detail below on the plan. Next slide. The criteria continued. The commission wanted us to identify improvement actions which directly respond to the overarching themes identified in the TUEC report and its associated goals. The cultural facts pertaining to Sempra are included in attachment C at pages 3 through 6. That's in the July filing, so I encourage you please to look at attachment C if you haven't had a chance already. We delineated there the positive cultural facts for Sempra and those where we could find improvement. Sempra's consultant is addressing the findings by building on Sempra's strengths and helping to facilitate a questioning attitude. Number 2, the commission wants us to directly respond to the TUEC's report findings, including related to corporate governance. See above, please. That's what we talk about in our attachment C and the work that the consultant is doing. Next slide. We're supposed to describe the key steps for development of a systemic approach to safety. And you'll see in attachment C at pages 7 through 8, we set forth the various phases of its work with our consultant. 5, we're supposed to explain how the safety culture improvement plan is effectively integrated into relevant governance and management systems, policy, processes, and plans. You'll find in attachment C at pages 2 and 3, Sempra explains how we'll exercise formal oversight over SoCalGas's plan implementation and bring that into existing governance and management systems. Additionally, Sempra has amended its SST charter, as I mentioned, to address safety culture specifically. And you'll see below too, Propolo is also going to address any governance documents as necessary. 6, we're supposed to show how the safety culture improvement plan is developed with the support and guidance of qualified external expertise with demonstrated experience in safety culture improvement for high hazard industries. In attachment C, we explain the role of its outside consultant. Propolo has provided materials about its qualifications in safety culture improvement and experience with public utilities. We'll get into that in a little bit, but they're very experienced in this space and are safety culture experts. Next slide. We're to provide for ongoing review and monitoring of implementation progress and effectiveness supported by quantitative and qualitative leading and lagging indicators and metrics. As we'll show you in the scope of work by Propolo, Propolo proposes to develop leading indicators for us and allows for strategy refinement as needed. 8, we're to include implementation timelines for each element of the safety culture improvement plan as applicable. Sempra believes that the timeline will need to be flexible, but we have an attached Gantt chart to show our current expectations. 10 was to include a cost estimate of the actions associated with implementing the elements of the plan broken down by activity of action. So we set forth in attachment C of page 8 that Sempra plans to retain its consultant fees at Sempra. 11 includes reporting requirements. So here, as a holding company, we don't believe we should have independent reporting requirements. Nonetheless, Jason talked about biannual reporting by SoCalGas, and we will continue to support and coordinate with the gas company. And we would provide input to SoCalGas for inclusion in the reporting. In this way, the commission parties will see what Sempra's activities include and where we are in the progress in the process. Next slide. Okay, so this is prepared by Propulo. These are the consultants that Sempra has engaged for this project. Next slide. So I'll just pause here for a minute so folks can take a look at it. There's a lot of content here, but just a couple key points here is that Propulo has a lot of experience, years and years of experience in this space. They take a very scientific approach to human behavior and combine that with their understanding of operations in companies, including a number of Fortune 500 companies. And also, I would just highlight here too that Propulo has extensive experience with public utilities in particular. Okay, next slide. Also here, this is also very dense, so I'll just pause here. I would just point out that the CEO of the firm is going to be leading this effort with Sempra. So we're working at the very top of the organization, but as you will see here, there are 4 very qualified members of the team on this project. Please take a minute. You can take a look at the qualification. Next slide. And so Propulo has reviewed the TUEC report. That was a big part of the engagement to make sure that Propulo understands and has reviewed the report and can take those recommendations and help us improve. And so on the left hand, you'll see the findings. Those were the guidance points that I discussed earlier. Under strategies, here's some more detail about what the plan includes. Development and communication of a shared mental model vision for safety with senior executive buy-in. The communication campaigns I mentioned. Review of organizational leading indicators for our culture and that of its operating companies. Developing new leading indicators, right, to consistently measure safety leadership and culture across the operating companies. There's executive safety leadership coaching to develop safety signals and messaging, communication strategy with guides and messaging around safety ownership. Review and update of charters for key governance forums, and this gets to the governance point I mentioned above. And developing and launching safety leadership training programs, support with embedding tools and activities. And the outcomes, the ideal here is to enhance safety governance across the Sempra group of companies, to provide new tools and capabilities to better govern companies and align leadership on a comprehensive concept of safety and safety culture. Next slide. And then this is detail about the phases. Phase 1 is gaining that shared understanding of safety that TUEC recommended. Phase 2 is the elaboration and execution of Sempra's strategy. And this is where we get into a lot of the communication campaigns and integration opportunities. Phase 3 involves executive coaching and ongoing support. So this is check-ins and coaching with key executives, tone from the top. And 4 is leadership training, customized leadership training to influence a questioning attitude towards Sempra's safety culture and the safety culture of its operating companies, as well as a more comprehensive view of safety and safety culture. And these points go directly to the cultural facts, going back to attachment C. Those relate directly to the cultural facts in the TUEC report that are specific to Sempra. Next slide. And this is the project schedule, Gantt chart, if you will. And so we are in the shared understanding phase right now. We're doing a lot of document review and coordinating, meeting weekly. And then as we go forward, this is the plan. And I believe next slide concludes for Sempra. Yes. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Stacy. Carolina, I'll just
Thank
have
you very much.
just a couple closing comments before we hand it back. I wanted to circle back on a couple of key themes as we wrap this portion of the presentation. One is to really just reinforce some of the things that Jason highlighted and that I highlighted in my opening comments around the fact that this effort is very much business-led. So the safety organization is definitely facilitating the implementation, but the business is leading this effort. We think that will give us the best opportunity for this to be sticky and lasting in our organizational culture. Secondly, Jason laid out a very strong and clear accountability model. My experience, it includes stints as head of construction for major projects, and so major project delivery and project controls and project structure is something that's part of my DNA, and so I'll be as hard as anyone on us to make sure we hit our marks on this effort. But that makes it easy for us to demonstrate to anyone interested that we are moving forward based on the plan that we set out. And then the fact that we are looking beyond compliance here is an important key to elaborate on here, and that is this idea of dynamic risk assessment that will allow us to continue to go beyond just the execution of policies and procedures and really looking at each job, each day, each instance as an opportunity to identify risks and hazards and put in place the proper mitigation for them. And making that part of our organizational DNA is something that we're looking to do here. Commissioner Sharoma, in her opening remarks, made a reference to things that we've already done. And I mentioned a couple of them in my opening comments, but a couple others that I want to highlight are basically a revamp of our incident investigation model here at SoCalGas, and moving from investigations to event learning opportunities. And we are in the education process in our organization of rolling out that effort. And then including the concepts around the EEI model for major hazard identification using the energy wheel, and educating our organization at every level around how we deploy that as part of our dynamic risk assessment model. And then finally, President Reynolds mentioned questions about our biggest challenges, right? And like any major cultural evolution in a large organization, organizational inertia is, one of the biggest challenges. And so the best way we think to overcome that is, again, to have this be business-led, have the communication channels be at every layer in the organization, but starting with the senior leadership in the company, getting them to understand the philosophical changes that are necessary, and also our safety professional organization, having them fully aware and bought into the changes that we're looking to make. Another big challenge is going to be, just large initiative fatigue, and convincing employees at every level that this is not a flavor of the month or even a flavor of the year, but it's part of our lasting approach. And then again, that idea of stickiness or persistence, that'll be a key challenge that we face, and the reason why we've invested such a large upfront effort in a robust change management plan. So with that, Carolina, I will hand back to you, and we can move to the next phase of the workshop.
Thank you, Mr. Williams, excuse me, and thanks to all the representatives from SoCalGas and Sempra that also presented. It is actually now 10:52, so it's time that we take just a quick 10-minute break, and let's reconvene at 11:02. So thank you, and we will reconvene at 11:02. I think we'll give everybody just an additional minute to trickle back. I don't see a lot of screens back on. Okay, I think most folks are trickling or hopefully trickling back. So it is now 11:03 and hopefully most participants have joined us or will be joining shortly. So let's go ahead and proceed. We will now get started with questions and discussion on the content of the proposed plan in phase 2. So I will open it now to questions from our commissioners on the virtual dais. And let me go ahead and just welcome Commissioner Rechtschaffen, who has now joined us on the virtual dais as well. Perhaps we can start with you, Commissioner Rechtschaffen. Not sure if you have any questions you'd like to ask our panelists.
Yes, thank you, Caroline. And I was listening from the start, even though I was not on the screen. I have one question, and I don't recall who said this, and then I have a general comment and questions, and I think my fellow commissioners may want to follow up as well. So the first specific question is, what did the API assessment of your safety management system uncover? What were the findings, and what have you done in response to that assessment?
One of the thanks. Thanks for the question. The API assessment was fairly exhaustive. I wasn't prepared to unpack it during this session, and I can follow up with any further elaboration on things. But a couple key things that came out of that API assessment is a focus around championship at the executive level for key elements of our safety-related focus, right? So having senior folks in the company that have some kind of a championship role around whether it's our 7 safety values or as we're deploying the Safety Forward initiative, our key work streams, and having that ownership be present throughout the enterprise creates more ownership, more credibility, more buy-in down the organization when these senior leaders are seen as champions of these key areas of what we do. And it also allowed us to kind of assess ourselves on a maturity curve around our adherence to API 1173 and the extent to which the way that we set up our SMS. And the good news was that it showed very well for us that we had set up our SMS and our 7 safety values in a way that easily aligns, corresponds, and can be connected back to the 10 tenets of API 1173.
Okay, thank you. Maybe you can follow up with us or the safety division with unpacking it as you said, but thank you. And I'm glad that you're having API assess your program. It sounds like you use their model and that they are the state of the art, if I'm understanding or reading it correctly to your remarks earlier.
Yep, we definitely tried to recognize the uniqueness of SoCalGas, but also kind of balance between having this be something that we own and that is part of our culture and the way that we understand things, while simultaneously being directly responsive and aligned with the rest of the industry and specifically API 1173.
Can I add one other quick question, and I want to move off this? Is this SMS designed for a gas utility like SoCalGas, or is it more for pipeline operations, or is it a holistic gas utility?
So absolutely holistic, and one of the reasons why we just didn't copy and paste API 1173 as our SMS is because, as you know, API 1173 was generated from the pipeline industry, or the chemical and pipeline industry. We wanted our SMS to be comprehensive and inclusive of not only pipeline safety, but employee safety, contractor safety, public safety. And so as we designed that SMS, our SMS for SoCalGas, it's reflective of that holistic view of safety.
Thank you. I want to ask you to follow up, not here because I don't want to hog the stage. One thing you said, or I think it was you said that, or one of the broad themes you identified is a recognition that workers are the best source of knowledge about how things work, or something to that effect. I don't know where in your improvement plan you talk about how you're effectuating that, or what that means in practice. So maybe you could follow up or point us to the parts of the report where you think that you're effectuating that. But I don't want to take time here for that. I have a general comment that I think Dr. Fleming has pointed out to us, Caroline and other staff have pointed out, and other commissioners probably share. And I think I know they'll be following up specifically with you on this. And this is how some of the improvement actions or initiatives tie back to the overarching themes in the 2EC report. Because the report may be, a great report, and there's a lot of great things in it, a lot of great initiatives, but if they don't relate back to what the underlying problems identified in the assessment are, they're not as helpful. That's one thing, and I'm going to ask you a specific follow-up about that. I think there's also some concerns, and I know Dr. Fleming and our staff will also follow up with you about how you're measuring some of the effectiveness of some of your broad initiatives. But let me ask you specifically about something this is an area that I'm very concerned about, and that is at the core of safety management systems and the safety culture, which is the defining safety as equivalent to compliance. And that's, of course, one of the two broad themes of the 2EC report. And in the document you filed, you say that is addressed by workstream 2, enhancing dynamic risk assessment capability. So I have a two-part question. I don't really know what dynamic risk assessment capability is, although I heard one of your colleagues talk about looking at things very granularly, each job, each day, something like that. But so maybe you could explain that a little bit more. But I am very familiar with risk assessment generally, and it would be helpful if you could explain some more your thinking of how this methodology gets away from a more fundamental cultural and mindset attitude that safety is equivalent to compliance.
Yeah, just at a high level, and I'll let Jason elaborate. When we think about the mindset that says that your policies and procedures, if you just follow them, then you'll be safe. That's the pivot. I think that's the opportunity here, and moving from that mindset to a mindset that says every time you start a new job, task, or operation, is a time to dynamically reassess the hazards that are present in the moment, on that day, at that time, for that operation specifically. Whereas you can plan something, there's work as planned and there's work as executed. So when you start to look at any potential differences between those two things, the best outcomes come when the folks that are doing that work, they have the policy as their baseline, but also they walk through some rigor and discipline around assessing all the potential sources of energy. And I referenced the energy world earlier, but assessing all the potential sources of energy that could potentially harm you, and walk yourself through an assurance that you have effective mitigations in place for all those hazards. And so that's kind of what's meant by dynamic risk assessment in this context, and really educating our frontline folks, supervisors, managers, to be as aware as possible of all the things that could potentially harm you. And then more importantly, testing that you have mitigations in place for all those potential sources.
Yeah, just to add a little bit on top of what Cedric said, it's looking at how we can really empower and enable people in the field to take a step back, look at the situation, not just look at what they're required to do, but look at potential risks, look at some complications, something that might be unexpected, and then understand what the potential effect of those risks and how those risks can be mitigated. So the idea is to transition away from looking at kind of a more structured, these are the list of things I must do. And while it's so important to comply with those rules, comply with those requirements, there needs to be an additional step where you kind of look more holistically at the situation and understand whether or not there's a way to be safer, there's a way to mitigate risk, there's a way to kind of prevent some sort of harm. And the goal there is that through education, through training, through putting the right tools in place, we will have people that are better able, more comfortable going out there and actively identifying, actively managing, actively mitigating risk.
Who's doing that? Is it the workers themselves, or is it the outside people who are determining there's a risk and here's the mitigation that needs to be actively implemented?
The intent is to create a tool that would be given to the worker, trained with the worker so that they understand kind of what to look for. So that's kind of the education, empowering, enabling aspect of it. So instead of just saying, these are the 5 things that must be done today at the job, there is a more dynamic way to look at what that job site is. For example, looking at the energy wheel, is there a risk associated with chemicals or gravity or height? So trying to look at what could lead to potential harm, not something specific. It could be that you have anything. You could have a job site that has potentially flammable material. So that would require you to take a step back, look at that risk and understand how you might be able to more actively manage that risk.
Is there more authority, and I'm going to stop talking, is there more authority given to the workers to mitigate the risk? Do they have the ability to do that on their own? Is there some, or do they still need to get supervisor approval? Is there a change in this approach?
Well, one of the things that we've leaned into heavily over the past several years is promoting stop work authority for employees. And so the employees are empowered to mitigate risk to some degree, right? There's a limit, obviously, but at a minimum, every employee has the ability, and we've seen an increase in utilization of this by our employees, to pause work, make sure that if there is a recognized hazard that doesn't have the sufficient mitigation, that you don't continue until you resolve that, right? And we've seen just through an increased submittal of these kinds of events that employees are more and more comfortable to pause a job and make sure that if there is an unmitigated hazard or even a misunderstanding about whether or not a hazard is effectively mitigated, we can have those conversations before the work resumes.
Thank you very much.
I can jump in with and follow up on, thank you, on your response to one of Commissioner Rechtschaffen's questions, where you highlighted the importance of leadership really championing safety and implementing your safety culture. I'd be interested in hearing from you further about how you measure the effectiveness of leadership in really speaking to the importance of safety culture within the organization. You've got a large group of employees. Do you gather feedback from them about the organization's commitment to safety, and how do you hold leaders accountable for whether or not you're succeeding in driving the importance of safety throughout the organization?
I'll speak to a couple of things and then ask Jason to elaborate on anything I might have missed. Well, one way that we can try to measure our effectiveness as safety leaders is, just kind of a quantitative question of how often are you getting in front of employees for robust two-way dialogue sessions. And so, through the first half of this year, we embarked on a goal to visit every location in our company, 80 locations, with multiple members at each location of our executive team. It was quite an undertaking. There's 25 executives at SoCalGas, and we needed to get to every place with multiple executives. But there was a robust package of communication material that was to be shared. There was open dialogue at the end and a collection of questions, follow-up feedback that was circled back with each of these locations. And so we put ourselves through the discipline of, tracking that and making sure that we hit every location. And so just quantitatively, those are some ways that we measure our effectiveness as a leadership team. But we also have an ongoing process of employee engagement surveys that allow us to directly poll our employees with their thoughts on how they think we're doing as leaders around the area of safety. And then as we move into successive years, we have the ability to tailor those questions. And we do believe that this effort, the Safety Forward effort, will cause us to tailor questions in different ways to try to get different kinds of responses from employees. But these surveys get down to the individual organizational level. And so we can differentiate how employees are, what their felt leadership experience is like in one area versus another. And then we can follow up with corrective actions.
Yeah, I think that last one especially is a big one. So looking at what we can do from an ongoing assessment perspective, whether or not that's surveys, whether or not it's focus groups, but something that enables us to get a sense of how effective the leadership engagement has been, how effective this change effort has been, something that helps understand and measure employee perceptions on these issues. The assessment component is really the big one. We are looking at some other indicators that might help measure changes in perceptions, but from my viewpoint, when you're talking about specifically how the leadership engagement has been and how effective that has been, the assessments are probably the most effective tool.
Is there a component of leadership performance that includes impact on this measurable feedback?
When you say impact, it makes me think about, this distinction between leading and lagging indicators, right? We've kind of made an intentional effort to focus a lot of our reporting around those leading indicators that determine how leaders influence employees. So things like, how often are we observing our employees? How often are we doing, field rides with employees? So those things are measurable things we use to kind of track that leadership engagement.
So to make sure I'm understanding, it sounds like you're measuring the activity. You're not necessarily holding the employee responses to surveys as a part of leadership performance review. Am I understanding that correctly?
No, the response to those surveys and assessments and the corrective actions associated with them are definitely part of the expected performance of any leader. And as we have our performance conversations with leaders, there are definitely conversations around, hey, how are we doing on your corrective action plan associated with the last employee engagement survey or the last safety barometer survey that we've done. So that's definitely a part of our leadership performance management process.
I appreciate it.
Thank you, Commissioner Reynolds. I think Commissioner Shiroma, you have your hand up. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Colleen. I have two very quick questions and then another question that shouldn't take too long. But I think that I would read Commissioner Reynolds' question to be tied to executive compensation. Okay, but having said that, my first question is, are you involving the unions in this effort?
So the short answer is yes, but it's a little complicated. So we had a union election. We had a new slate of union leaders that came in the first half of this year. Our senior director of SMS and myself met with those union leaders. and shared with them both the 2C assessment and a high level view of how we were thinking about putting our plan together and really soliciting their support to help us, especially with the 2A engagement at the frontline worker level. There's been some change, and that our union is our largest union is now under a different leadership model, and we're waiting for a new election to happen. And so that it's definitely on our roadmap. As soon as the new leadership slate gets elected, we'll go back and start over again with that engagement process. But there was just a little bit up there.
Okay. And I happen to be on the NARUC Black Sky Committee. And so my question, it has to do with communication, and in the SoCalGas and Sempra territory, it's a pretty wide territory, urban and rural. There may be areas where there's low cell phone signal and what have you. And are you providing the resources to your field employees to be able to communicate quickly and effectively?
So I want to make sure I understand the question. So we have a pretty robust communication network across our service territory from El Centro to Visalia. And, you know, there is no known issues that I'm aware of where we have difficulty communicating with our employees, either through radio, telephone, network connections. Even in our most remote areas, we have a strong network of communication with our folks.
Okay, glad to hear. My third question is, can you walk through what happens on a typical day? A team arrives for work in the morning. Maybe it's a team that goes out and does inspections, and there's a supervisor. And how does that conversation go in terms of safety?
That's an interesting question. So I know from my time as a frontline supervisor and manager of frontline workers, and as a frontline worker myself, there's generally a morning, tailboard meeting with the work group, and there is a discussion around general hazards for the location, whether it's traffic or weather or personal hydration or whatever might be unique to that location. And then as the crews disperse, in the case of a construction crew, there is job site tailboard meetings where they discuss the specific hazards of the work that they're about to undertake. I'm not sure I'm answering your question though. I want to.
You are.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, I think those morning conversations between frontline supervisors and employees, I'm extremely confident that those happen every day, and the key safety messages are relayed to employees, and feedback from employees happens on a daily basis at every location.
Okay, and just a comment, it's very important for the rank and file, for the staff to have confidence in their supervisors and management in and around safety. Confidence that management cares about certainly personal safety. We saw the slide deck on such, just really the overall integrity of the utility and capitalizing on the on-the-ground knowledge from the staff. Okay, thank you for your answers to the questions. Back to you, Carolina.
Thank you, Commissioner Jerome. We do have President Reynolds' hand raised as well, so please go ahead with your questions, President Reynolds.
Thank you, Carolina. I did want to just build on the questions raised by Commissioner Rechtschaffen and Commissioner Shroma, and I appreciated the example that you gave of the dynamic risk assessment. I think it's really helpful to think about an example of how some of these concepts that you're talking about translate to workers on the ground in a situation where, as Commissioner Shroma it got to in her question of what does it look like on the ground. But I wanted to ask the question in a little bit different way. We heard from Dr. Fleming that it is really important to think about safety in terms of not just personnel safety, but also safety to the community, larger issues. And I wanted to make sure I heard you right, or give you a chance to provide a little bit more of an explanation, because it sounds like you're, kind of, I think very rightly translating these concepts to work situations and saying to employees, don't think about just the job you have in front of you, the job as planned, but think about how you're going to execute that work. But you described it as look at what could harm you. And I wasn't sure whether you're also incorporating look at what could harm others. So, there might be some incident that occur while the worker's at the job site, very important to think about, but what about when they leave and then a week, a month down the road, there's some incident that occurs because of infrastructure problems. And so how do you kind of incorporate that concept into the structure that you described on dynamic risk assessment? And then the second part of my question is on how getting to you gave an answer on stop work authority. So you're encouraging the employees to say, okay, we're going to stop work. Do you also have incentives built into, for instance, evaluation? So are employees evaluated in terms of like, how many job sites did you visit? So are they encouraged to do, 20 versus 10, which seems a little bit inconsistent and maybe a disincentive to stop work or to expand the work that because of safety issues that they identify. In other words, so do you have built in encouragement to take the time you need to do risk assessments versus we're going to evaluate you and give you a bonus based on the number of sites you covered and how quickly you went? Are those the kinds of things you think about when you're implementing some of these concepts into actual work on the ground? So I think that's a two-part question. Thank you.
Okay, I'll take a shot at answering both, and then Jason can clean up for me. Around dynamic risk assessment, this is the way that our plan is envisioned. This initiative under the dynamic risk assessment workstream, what we're envisioning, we haven't fully completed this yet. There's a lot of work to do around building out the specific initiative, but the way that Jason, Gwen, and I kind of talk about how we envision this, it would be a matrix that allows an employee to start with a common set of hazards associated with major types of work that we do. That could be 10, 20 different major types of work that we undertake. And under each one of those work types, there would be a kind of a standard set of hazards that you would need to make sure that you walk yourself through that mitigation exercise on. And then layered on top of that now is kind of the four major lenses that we are looking at safety through, which are employee safety, contractor safety, public safety, and infrastructure safety. And so that is kind of a second layer of assessment that you have to ask yourself about all those risks through those four lenses. And by doing that, you answer the question, what is the risk under each one of these hazard types associated with public safety? So that would cause you to make sure that you have built into your work plan a way to mitigate any potential risk to, say, the public from the work that we happen to be undertaking. Whether that's making sure that the plates you leave behind for a covered trench are secured properly, those kinds of things you would walk yourself through as part of the execution of that work. The finished product is a work in progress, but that's the kind of end goal of what we're trying to get at under that initiative. Relative to stop work authority, and if I heard you correctly, it's kind of the maybe hidden disincentive to report stop the jobs or stop work incidents relative to productivity requirements or the desire to get a number of jobs accomplished in a certain time frame. I feel more confident now than ever that the employees are more likely to, less shy about, and more invested in submitting the stop work initiatives. And, you know, when one of the things that we think about in terms of, you know, a measure of psychological safety is the percentage of those stop work forms, because the employees have the ability to do them anonymously, right? And the percentage of those that the employee is willing to put their name to, we see that as a measure of openness and psychological safety in our organization, that the employee is actually willing to put their name down on these stop work incidents or near miss close calls. And we try to incentivize that by, you know, Gwen and I reaching out to that employee and thanking them for, you know, that could be a lot, but it's worth the effort, right? To recognize that employee for stepping forward. So, you know, there's not a specific way that I can answer your question empirically, other than to say that we do reinforce as part of our communication to our employees that it's more important for us, and it's actually more productive in the long run for you to complete the job safely, even if it takes a little bit longer, than to have an incident and now you know the implications to, you know, productivity are even worse, right? And so we definitely lean into the idea that it's more efficient in the long run to do the work safely.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and I think that last comment got to the second part of my question, which was not just on stop work, but also on the incentives that are present to motivate employees to really do the full risk assessment and to do the job that to take into account mitigating versus cutting corners in the name of productivity. So I don't know if you have anything else to add there in terms of how you evaluate employees or how you make sure that you're not disincentivizing safety, but it sounds like that you don't have reviews or bonuses or any kind of employee incentives based on just pure productivity in terms of numbers or time of you know, spent at sites.
That's correct. Our management compensation model, incentive compensation model, is the vast majority of it is around safety and specifically around leading indicators versus lagging indicators.
Thank you.
Thank you, President Reynolds. I see Commissioner Hauk's hand is up, so please go ahead with your questions, Commissioner Hauk.
Thank you, Carolina. And this may be something, you know, after hearing from SoCalGas, that may want to get Dr. Fleming to weigh in. And it kind of follows up from the other commissioners' questions. The report is highly conceptual in many ways. It outlines general indicators, and many of the key benefits in the initiative are very broad. So, for example, one of the key benefits identified for initiatives 2A, 2B, 4A, and 4B is improved understanding of safety and risk. And it's not clear whose understanding is going to be improved and what this would involve. I think just now you've provided some more specifics in response to some of the questions provided. But without this level of information in the initiative, how will SoCalGas determine if the initiative is achieving the benefits, and at every level in working with both the executives, mid-management, the workers on the ground, contractors, subcontractors, and so just looking at sort of the generalizations there, how do we get more specific so we know that we're being able to measure achievement?
Absolutely, thank you. And there's kind of two components of that, the way we're looking at it. The first is looking at some of the more qualitative indicators or measures we can look to measure effectiveness of some of those benefits. So what we're planning to do is to look at how we can assess existing data to establish a baseline, and then look to measure changes in opinions, perceptions, beliefs that would indicate adoption of a more comprehensive concept with safety, or a broader risk awareness. And to provide an example of that, we're planning to look back over the last, I'll say, year of our near miss, stop the job, close call reporting. And we're going to analyze those reports to determine, was that near miss, close call, stop the job, did that occur because, for example, someone identified a risk themselves? based on the 2EC assessment, our expectation is that we would see a larger skew toward a focus towards personnel safety. If we're effective in communicating out a more comprehensive concept of safety, we expect in the years to come that distribution would also start to identify more and more public safety risks, more and more system safety risks. So you'd have a more even distribution. And that would be some indication that A, you're getting more stop the jobs or close calls. You're showing more trust because there's less of them are anonymous. And then you're seeing a more comprehensive understanding of safety because you're seeing more stop the job because of risk to a customer, risk to the system, risk to the public. So that's the kind of a qualitative approach we're thinking of to measure it. Another option, another measure we're looking at developing is looking at our incident evaluation. So our learning team incident evaluation models, again, looking back over the last year or so, taking a representative sample of that, of those reports, and then analyzing them for what I'll kind of broadly call quality. So do those reports show kind of a deeper analysis of risk? Do they show an awareness of public safety and system safety, as well as personnel safety? And again, we think we can measure effectiveness of our implementation if we continue to do that going forward. So we would start to see more detailed analysis of risks, looking at systemic issues, looking at system improvements, as opposed to looking at just, what went wrong or who made a mistake. So we're hoping to look at some of the more qualitative information that we already gathered, and then how we can use that to assess plan effectiveness. And then the second component of this is we do anticipate that once we have kind of built out the initiative teams for all of the initiatives, that one of the first steps we would take is looking at the initiative, looking at the benefits, and trying to also identify some more specific initiative metrics, initiative measures. So we wanted to start with kind of the broader benefits and the broader benefits kind of tied to the specific initiative benefits, and then segue into some of the more initiative focused efforts once those teams have been built out.
It sounds like you're going to continue to build on that as you get more information and more data and implement the process.
Exactly. Our plan, we put in our plan kind of what our thinking is now of how we could measure those benefits, but we intend to continue to develop it, continue to improve, and to continue to get more granular, more specific data. But if you look at the accountability model of our plan, we did identify kind of our initial thinking of how we can use metrics, indicators, and assessments to start measuring those changes now.
Thank you. And I don't know if Dr. Fleming had any comments on that at all.
Yeah, thanks. I think it's good that you're planning to develop indicators. It obviously would have been helpful in evaluating the plan if they were present. One of the comments that you made, Jason, was that you started first with what information you currently had and thought how you could use it. To me, it would seem more effective to start with what you're trying to change and decide how you would assess that, rather than thinking this is what we've got, right? Because this is what we've got maybe sends you down the wrong path in terms of what you need to measure, right? So staying focused on what you're trying to change would seem to be important in terms of assessing the extent to which you're succeeding in changing that.
I appreciate that. What we're thinking is that we're trying to identify kind of what we could do in the near term to start using the information we have to start putting together baselines that could be used to measure effectiveness. So that's kind of the indicators that we included in our plan. And then we would develop more initiative focused indicators as we're providing more detail around the initiative. So we've outlined the initiatives, outlined the work streams, outlined kind of the programmatic plan-wide intent, the plan-wide purpose, and how we think we can start measuring that today, with an understanding that there are opportunities to continue and improve how we measure those things and how we report on those things. That was the intent.
I'll just add that it's easier when you have an objective standard of what good is, and then it's easy to do the gap analysis and then move towards closing that gap, right? When there's not as much coalescence around what the standard looks like for what good is, or if it looks different based on different industries, different companies. And this is an approach that we took. We're open to different ideas and ways of doing things, but we wanted to really kind of understand where we are today, and that's an important first step to progress is having an honest assessment of where you are today. And so that's the approach that we took, Mark, but open to different ideas about it.
Yeah, well, I suppose I would argue that the 2EC report provides you with quite a good analysis of where you are today and provides you with a fair amount of data about your current baseline. So I think that would be, and it also provides a description of what good looks like. So I think that's something to sort of think about. The other thing you mentioned earlier in your presentation, I think it was Cedric, that you're planning to do pulse surveys and perception surveys to measure potentially change. And while in general, in many contexts, that would be a good thing, and it may well be something that you might find useful, I would caution that there is a bit of a challenge in terms of what we know already about SoCalGas in this space. If we look at the assessment part that was survey based, and if we look at the assessments that you've had in the past through the barometer survey, you tend to get very high scores. And I don't think increasing scores is necessarily going to be a sign that things are moving in the right direction, right? So I think you're close to topping out on that. So you'll need to think very carefully about what that assessment is going to look like and what change would look like. So if you did based on what was done last summer, so only a year ago, your frontline employees, if we were just looking at frontline employees, they were running in the 4s on a 5-point scale in terms of their perception of management commitment to safety. The issue really was that their perception of management commitment to safety was management commitment to personnel safety. And there aren't great tools. There are some that claim to do it, that measure process safety or public safety. They tend to be highly correlated with perception of personnel safety. So I don't think they're tapping into the right thing. So that's just a word of warning as you go to develop those metrics, that you might find yourself boxed in where at your baseline you're at a 4.5. You're not going any higher, right? So you're going to then have done this big intervention, and then you're then concluding it didn't work. The sort of, having read your report, my broad feedback is there's significant effort needing to be done on the assessing the impact of your initiatives, and given the scale and size of the initiatives you're proposing, that's going to be a really important part of the picture. Thanks. Sorry, I know a bit too long.
So, Mark, just to follow up on that for a second, one of the things that we had discussed was, definitely not just using the same questions that would have been part of previous surveys and measuring our progress against that, but we were thinking that there might be an opportunity with the right folks to help us think about this, to ask different questions, right? And so to set our baseline current based on maybe a different set of questions through some different lenses that allow us to kind of assess ourselves today based on questions that were different than the ones we've asked ourselves in the past. At least that's how we were thinking about it.
Yeah, I think that's definitely wise, and I think you can have them initiative specific, have a bit of a wider scale. All of those things would be worthwhile doing. So initiative specific about management commitment to this initiative, maybe specific behavioral things in terms of how frequently you've spoken to leaders about public safety. There's a lot of stuff that can be done. My only caution, I just wanted to be careful from some of what you've written. It sounded like you were going to repeat more of the surveys you've done in the past to be able to see change over time. And given I know your scores on that, I would be surprised if it's going to get much more positive. That would just be my fear for you rather than anything else. That you end up doing something that's actually very good, but doesn't show any significant change just because you're already at a ceiling, right?
Okay, thanks. Good feedback.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, SoCalGas. And Commissioner House, I wanted to check if there were any additional follow-up questions you had to these responses.
No, I don't have additional follow-up questions. That was helpful dialogue. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, commissioners. We appreciate all your engagement and feedback and questions. I will open it now to questions from attendees. If you can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. As we explained earlier, we will now, take questions from attendees, but you'll be called in the order that you indicate an interest in participating. As a reminder, an informal public comment session will take place at the end of the workshop. So for members of the public wishing to make a statement or comment, but right now, please, anybody can raise their hand or place a question in the chat box. I'll give folks some time to raise their hands. There are no questions at the moment. I may go ahead and ask the question myself, if that is okay. Both Sempra and SoCalGas talked about this concept of self-reflection and understanding where you're at right now. So I'm hoping that both the organization representatives can sort of explain to us what that reflection outcomes were and how, more specifically, and how do those feed into the plan that you have proposed?
Yeah, I think the easiest answer, Carolina, is in the three kind of philosophical pillars that underpin our plan. We came to those through that self-reflection, and as we thought about leveraging our culture change partners to kind of understand what current thinking would be around ways that we can improve on some of the recommendations from 2EC. Those three things kind of resonated with us as they walked us through those. We did our own internal study around human and organizational performance, high reliability organizations, and learning organizations. We saw a good correlation between the things that those ideas and frameworks would build up and how they would help us shore up areas where we thought we could get better. So that was kind of the linkage between our reflection on the 2EC assessment as well as the API assessment and our kind of continual assessment model through the barometer surveys that we do. That was the connection between that reflection and how we incorporated that into our plan.
And I'd also like to add, I think it's helpful to point out that if you look at the work streams we've put together, and I'll point to the work stream one, specifically the first two initiatives, the intent of those initiatives is kind of that this reflection is ongoing, that those dialogues that happen with the leadership level, those dialogues that happen across the organization is an ongoing effort for us to keep talking, keep reflecting, keep discussing the 2EC assessment, discussing our plan, discussing these opportunities to improve. So the intent is not that we kind of take what we have now and just go out and start doing, but that part of the process will be ongoing efforts to communicate, to dialogue, to seek opportunities to continue to learn and improve. So I point to those two initiatives as being really important foundational initiatives where we're intending to have really meaningful discussions throughout the organization on the assessment, on these concepts, on our direction, on safety.
Thanks, Jason. Before we move on to Stacy, and sorry, I wanted to just quickly follow up on what you said, Jason. So these two initiatives that you have for Workstream 1, they sound like they're fundamental to the rest of the plan. They also, and there was an example earlier from, I think, President Reynolds' question on dynamic risk assessment and how dynamic risk assessment can consider that greater scope of safety to go beyond occupational safety, which is one of the issues found in the report. So my question to you is, how can you develop solutions or initiatives to issues that you haven't yet discovered or understood why you have that issue, or have that information inform the plan? So perhaps I just want to understand that better.
Absolutely, yeah. So I think it's a difference between what self-reflection has happened now and then these ongoing processes to continue to dialogue. So we absolutely engaged in extensive conversations internally and externally about the 2EC assessment. Our safety culture improvement plan was developed based on those conversations. We also recognize that part of that plan will need to be kind of flexibility in learning and continuing to improve. And I think what you're identifying is that there might be opportunities to continue to evolve, change, and enhance other initiatives based on the dialogues that occur in that work stream one. And I don't disagree. I think there is an opportunity that through those discussions, we identify other actions that could be effective, opportunities to kind of learn, change, and improve some of the other initiatives. So I think it's an ongoing process of looking at how we can be safer and be better.
Thanks, Jason. And I have some follows, but I will wait for everybody else to get their response and questions. And Stacy, please go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, sure, Carolina. To me, I think Dr. Fleming talked at the last workshop about Sempra's focus on continuous improvement and operational excellence, right? And he talked in particular about how we've done this amazing job with diversity and inclusion. When he talked to focus groups and so forth, diversity and inclusion were top of mind, right? That's really a big part of Sempra's culture. And so I think the big reflection here is that, we've all talked about safety and safety results. We all, meaning the commission, the gas company, obviously is the operational entity, and Sempra through its risk management processes. And I think the real shift here is looking at safety as a cultural aspect, right? Changing the way we think about it and focusing on safety as perceptions and understandings and common values. And to me, I think that's the real reflection here. And we're embracing it. We're really looking forward to continuing this journey, and I'm looking forward to the work with Propulo to implement TUIC's recommendations in that regard. I think that's really the big shift.
Thanks, Stacy. I just will. Did you have a comment, Cedric?
Yeah, just one last thing to close the circle on that question, Carolina. One of the big reflections is the opportunity that exists for us to really lean towards our frontline employees for solutions. And that there can be a tendency in large organizations to have solutions come from the top down without enough input from frontline workers. So a huge part of the reflection and it's kind of seen in the way that the initiatives are envisioned is to really pull ideas from the front line and demonstrate to them in a way that is regenerative, that we hear them and that we are deploying the ideas that come from them to the extent we can. And that was a big area of reflection for the leadership.
Thanks, Cedric. I would just highlight a part of the TUIC report that, it found that there hasn't been success in some of the campaigns of rolling out, for example, the SMS to employees and so on, potentially because they are not really understanding of why you're undertaking some of these initiatives. And so in looking down the pipeline, you're looking to get buy-in from a broad set of your organization, your entire organization. So this entire process of understanding why you're doing what you're doing, the self-reflection, the outcomes of that, and what you share with the the company employees and with the organization is going to have a very big impact. I'm not really entirely clear how a lot of these whys are connected and what you're trying to address is connected with some of the initiatives. But I will stop there and we can discuss more about that. We actually have a question from Renee Gill. So Renee, you have your raised hand. Please go ahead, unmute yourself, and go ahead with your question. Renee, you can go ahead and unmute yourself if you have a question.
Thank you. I thought I was unmuted. So I've really enjoyed the discussion this morning. I did have a question about how, you mentioned that human error is normal. And I would just observe that also it's normal to try to not admit your mistakes. And so I'm wondering how you go about encouraging people to acknowledge and to move on with their superiors and admit their mistakes, creating a culture in which that's acceptable and approved.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Renee. That is a key to the success of this culture change effort. And one of the realities is, and I just kind of know this from my time as a frontline employee, is that what you say matters less than what you do. And so as we have started to socialize these ideas with this leadership team from the top down and with our safety professionals, demonstrating through our actions that there is not a negative impact to you from stepping forward, even if you've made an honest mistake. And it's reinforcing when we demonstrate that by responding in a way that is reinforcing. When employees do step forward and are honest about what mistake occurred, and even the way that we are restructuring our event learning opportunities to focus less on who failed and more about what about the system could be reinforced to allow it to fail safely or maybe not have an incident in the first place. The reason why the culture change is a long, arduous road is because the only way these ideas embed themselves is by continual reinforcement and demonstration to the frontline folks that we mean what we say. And the only way to do that is by doing it. As strange as it is to say that. But one of the key messages for our leadership team is that leadership's response to failure is extremely important. And so conditioning ourselves to respond in ways that are reinforcing to the frontline employees frees people, gives people the psychological safety to admit a mistake or point out a problem and know that we'll be responsive to address it, A, and B, we won't be punitive in terms of how we respond to an honest mistake that an employee makes.
I think that's very heartening. I would also add that it's important that executives can admit their own errors at times. I was heartened by a recent article in which a number of columnists admitted that they were wrong on a certain prediction they had made. And I find that kind of view very refreshing in our society. So as you say, if you model it, perhaps people will get the message more quickly than if you just say it. Thank you.
Thank you, Renee. Thank you. We have another question. Commissioner Shiroma, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Neglected to ask one more question. And folks, you may have covered this already, but in the training effort being done underway, are you doing desktop exercises insofar as, let's say you're practicing, you've got a pipeline rupture. What if you have found in the distribution system, and what do you do and what happens? Who talks to who reports to who? I mean, in terms of just sheer practice sessions. So are you folding in desktop practice sessions in the training? Thank you.
Commissioner Sharona, you were cutting out a bit, so I want to make sure SoCalGas understood your question.
I did have one question. Do you mean the culture training that we're envisioning as part of this effort, or do you mean training kind of in a broader sense?
Desktop training, that you create a particular scenario and team has to go through and deal with it and problem solve it. So sheer desktop scenario training.
I think the answer is yes. Well, I know the answer is yes, because I just got an update on some of the progress that the organizational development team has been making on revamping some of the leadership safety training for our folks that is going to become part of our annual or periodic introduction and refresher training. And it's really about scenario-based training. So Jason, you want to elaborate a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is a key component of a lot of these trainings, is thinking not just about the concept we're trying to convey, but also what it actually means to the people that are receiving the concept. So how does that impact the work you're doing? How does that impact your job? And then how would it impact a certain condition or a certain scenario? So when we're looking at putting together the training, it will have scenario-based exercises. We're looking at kind of creating training that's more interactive in that sense, learning modules that'll help walk through scenarios, walk through the impacts, walk through the effects on the position, the person, the scenario, and the work. And then also looking at how we can expand that out to some of the other activities. So, the dynamic risk assessment that we're talking about, looking at identifying specific scenarios and then walking through again, okay, what are the hazards that you could identify? What are the risks you could identify? What are the mitigations that might be options? So really trying to make it interactive, really trying to make it scenario focused, not just kind of a push out of text and information.
Thank you. And that has been very key, very important in the PSPS events, which you all are not directly involved with. And that type of desktop exercise is also involved local government and external parties. I'm not suggesting that that's appropriate here, but something to consider. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Sharona. I have, since we don't have other questions on the line right now. Oh, go ahead, Mark.
If there's an opportunity just to ask a couple of just clarifying questions, and just I was interested, Stacey, in your presentation and some of the plans that some of the detail that you added around the work that you're going to do at Propolo and your senior leadership team. Is there have you thought about or considering including SoCalGas senior leaders in those sessions so that there's alignment between Sempra and SoCalGas?
Yeah, Mark, if you look at the back part of the presentation, you'll see that is the alignment and coordination is part of what the work will include. I don't know what that means every session or so forth, but yes, there's going to be a distinct effort to make sure there's coordination, and so those lessons are brought. The other subsidiaries are brought into the learnings.
Mm-hmm. Because I suppose the risk is, you've got SoCalGas, doing a sort of a similar activity, but with a different sort of slightly different approach. And then, Sempra, that you could end up in two different places, which is not really the intent. So trying to keep that alignment is, as part of this change process, is going to be important. Would be just something that occurred to me when you were giving that presentation.
It's a good point, and it is something that Jason and I have talked about, and what we've tried to incorporate into the plan. So yes, that's important to do. I agree.
Yeah, yeah. And I suppose all that was in my head was I wonder if the champions of the SoCalGas initiatives, could be looped in. I don't know how that relationship would work, but being able to have those people share those views, I think would be probably quite helpful.
And Mark, thank you. We'll take that back and make sure that your points and the broader inclusion is something that we look at. So I will definitely take that back.
Great. The other thing, Cedric, you mentioned in your description, which was about the dialogues at all of your locations, and you've got 80 locations, 25 executives, and more than one executive to each location, and that's great that you went and had that dialogue. You should have described it as a sort of monumental task. And I'm sure it was tricky to make it happen. But on a sort of go forward basis, is there intention for for your executives to be visiting those locations and having dialogues with staff? And if that's yes, and is that new?
So the model is to continue that process on an ongoing basis. The subject matter will always include elements of safety and safety dialogue. But it's also important to know that we also have a model through our Executive Safety Council where on a quarterly basis, we go to a different work site and have 3-layer dialogue sessions with both frontline employees, frontline supervisors, and middle managers to have kind of real-time dialogues specifically around safety topics as just part of our ongoing model we've been doing for many years now. But to answer your specific question, that what we call the We Lead Tour, which is how we branded it, is something that we intend to continue. That was not just a one and done. And then also the executive sponsors for the initiatives are going to be part of our more active regular engagement at specific locations around the enterprise to try and create that more regular interface from the executive level to the front line.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned, I think, about leading indicators used as part of your performance metrics. Are these visits part of that for your executive leadership and for your management? Do they have an expectation to meet a certain number of visits, certain number of locations, certain number of visits per quarter, or what's your process?
So down to the level of every management employee, those expectations are not built into every management employee's performance plan, but in the aggregate, it is part of our incentive compensation to visit every location with the executive team, and I think are 99.9% completed with that for this year.
Great. I mean, particularly at the executive level, each executive having specific expectations, and that tied to compensation is a best practice for industries like yours, with a reasonable level of frequency.
Yeah.
Anybody got any other questions? I have.
Mark,
I don't
you
want
can
to spend the whole time just keep asking. I mean, a lot of my focus has been on the milestones. Sorry.
Right. So we don't currently have any questions on the line. So if you do have additional questions, I definitely urge you to please go ahead.
So I think for the majority of I suppose my questions about the plan was just for a bit more detail, particularly around how things are going to be measured and what the sort of expectation is. One of the principles that you mentioned in your plan, and I agree with it, is this idea of flexibility. and that you change the plan as you learn. And the challenge a little bit is that without good indicators of how the plan is going, then it's very hard to change them, right? So if you don't measure how well it's working, then it's hard to be able to revise it to make sure it's working better. So I think that's and I think that's been mentioned by other speakers, that the need for specific performance outcome measures that are tied specifically to each initiative, I think is going to be critical for you to be able to modify the plan as you go, right? How would you know to change it unless you know it's working? So that's not really a question. It's just a comment on where we're at in terms of the plan as you go forward. So I would encourage you to do that. Also, you mentioned attachment B, where you sort of align the cultural facts with, and then the identified traits, and then the plan. And I've read it a couple of times, and I'm still struggle to be able to link those things together. That's a bit of a challenge I'm having in terms of how the plan relates back to not even the individual facts. I'm not really that concerned about that, but more the broader traits for each of the overarching themes, how the plan's going to hit them. For me, I'm struggling a little bit with that. I don't think you can answer the question in terms of this is how we do it, but I see what you've tried to do. It's just I'm just struggling a bit to get my head around that, and maybe some more clarity on that would help. I don't think it's something you can provide just now, though.
I did have a question on your first. Sorry.
Yep.
Question on your first point on the measures. I mean, I'd be interested in your thoughts on kind of how what the right kind of package of measures might be. I mean, I'll say the easier ones are what I'll call milestones, so that you're kind of moving along at the pace you're getting things done. We've also looked to identify metrics, all those, looking at a training one, percentage of employees that have taken training, or percentage of bases, the number of bases visited. So those are kind of more quantitative metrics, and are certainly things that can be created and things that we're looking at. And then when you start to get into kind of the more what I'll call conceptual qualitative ideas around what are indicators that hearts and minds are being changed, that's where we've included in our plan our thoughts on how that could be measured. And I'll say some indicators that are intended to be data oriented, kind of as you noted, taking some of the things that we have already and seeing how we can analyze them to understand changes, improvement, trends, and then also looking at assessments. So whether or not that's a pulse check or a future comprehensive assessment, those are the two, the indicators and the assessment that get more to the qualitative side of things. And I'm just curious if you have any more specific feedback on what the right mix of those items might be.
Yeah. So the first thing, just to be clear to everybody who's on the line here, this is difficult, right? So the fact that it's something that I'm picking up on, it's a very hard thing to do in most cases. The way that you would approach it is to look at, well, what's the outcome we're looking for, and then how do we know that's happening? Okay, so for each of your initiatives, you've identified key benefits. Now, some of them are more high level than being sort of specific enough, but for those where, if we take, I'm going to cheat a little bit and just take an easy one. But when we talk about the dynamic risk assessment, okay, so you're training people to use the energy wheel, and what you would expect as one of the outcomes of that, and there's papers that have already done this, so that's why I know it's very doable, is to then look at the quality of the risk assessments that are done afterwards. You can look at a sample of risk assessment before and sample of risk assessment afterwards, and then you see, oh, we've got better, right? That is a way to look at something in terms of a concrete outcome. You've also talked about maybe for your level one to sort of try to share a broader perspective on risk and safety. Well, there's lots of ways you can measure that. You talked about focus groups where we ask people, just like we did in 2EC, tell me about safety, right? And if you do that in an open way, you're not leading people in that, you should see more discussion about public safety. And when you talk about people who are maybe not in operational roles, or even those who are, how does the activity you're doing today impact public safety? And so that may not be a number that you can say, oh, wow, we've moved from a 3.7 to a 4. You should be able to capture that data in a quantitative way to show that change over time, and in terms of those sort of activities. So I think the thing that, so you have some ideas about indicators that work in general, and those are fine, but I think what's missing is tying it to the specifics of the initiatives that you're planning. And I think you have, I think you're going to need to have what I would call process measures, which is, I think you've already said about the number of people who turn up at sessions, the number of people who participate, who attend training, those sorts of things. Those are sort of process measures, and they're relatively easy to capture. And then outcome measures that show you the extent to which people's knowledge and understanding have changed. So if you're going to give someone training, you expect that their knowledge of the topic has increased from time before and after the training. And I would refer you to, and I can probably put the link in the in the chat, but it's well known. Kirkpatrick for the evaluation of training is a good framework for evaluation in general, right? You know, so it talks about 4 different levels of evaluation, and the highest level being outcomes. So to develop these outcome measures, I would link your key benefits to a specific measurable outcome. I think if I was doing that, if I were you, I would delete some of the key benefits, because you know, it would just become too unmanageable. What are the really important things that we're trying to achieve with this one initiative? And let's just have 1, maybe 2 benefits for each initiative, so that you can have a measure of those, so that it's a bit more sort of focused. Yeah, so so instead of completion milestones, I would probably have process outcomes, which is, are we doing the thing we said we're going to do, which is number of people trained, and then outcome benefits, which are, is the thing that we're doing having the intended effect? And the problem, I think, for some performance-oriented companies, which you are, very performance-oriented companies, is that they struggle with when performance is not perfect, right? And the reality of this process is it's going to be messy and unpleasant, and a lot of the stuff isn't going to work, right? Not a lot, some of the stuff is going to work, and you're going to have to sort of accept that, and that people get very uncomfortable with that process. So anyway, I think that somewhere there your answer was provided.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fleming and SoCalGas. We have actually reached the end of our Q&A session and discussion, and we will now turn to the informal public comment portion. Can we go to the next slide, please? We can go to the next slide again. Thank you. So WebEx participants, as you know, just raise your hand, and for those who are wanting to participate by the phone, dial *3 and listen out for the first six digits of your phone number for your turn to provide a comment. So we'll open the session now. No comments so far, but I think we're going to give 1 minute, under a minute, just to give people the opportunity to follow the instructions. We still do not have any informal public comments, so we could end this session. I do think that everybody should know that you can provide formal written comments. You can submit them online through the proceeding docket, and the link can be found in today's agenda. If you need assistance, please contact the Public Advisor's Office at public.advisor@cpuc.ca.gov. And I will now, we can change the slide, please. Thank you. I will now turn it over to Commissioner Rechtschaffen for some closing remarks. Commissioner Rechtschaffen.
Thank you, Carolina. Thank you all for an informative discussion. I learned a lot. I came away somewhat encouraged, with some questions remaining, and look forward to some follow-ups. I think Dr. Fleming said it right. This is hard. This is a big lift. The measurements especially hard. I was very encouraged to hear SoCalGas talk about the need for champions at the top, but also worker empowerment at the bottom. I heard you say that you're committed to the ongoing executive management team visiting sites in the field. I don't know if you're committed to every one of that 80 sites every year, but the more you can get out there, the better. You've heard from all the commissioners, as well as Dr. Fleming, the importance of better tying your initiatives to the overall themes, and in particular, tying the indicators and metrics rather to the initiatives being implemented, so that we understand what's working, what's improved, even if it is just a qualitative assessment, like Dr. Fleming said in the last interchange, of how is the dynamic risk assessment that's been done now better than the type of risk assessment that was done before. We really do very much want to focus on outcome-based measures, not just process-based or activity-based, but also ones that don't create perverse incentives. And your responses indicate that you're very cognizant of not wanting to create perverse incentives. I applaud you for focusing on leading indicators, and look forward to more creative thinking about, I don't know if it was Jason or Cedric who said this, how hearts and minds are being fundamentally changed. So thank you for your work on this. There's more to be done, but we do appreciate your deep engagement and commitment to these important safety issues.
Thank you, Commissioner Rechtschaffen. I want to check with Commissioner Haug. Would you have any closing remarks that you would like to share?
Just, I want to say I agree with Commissioner Rechtschaffen. I want to thank all the participants, SoCalGas, Sempra for their presentations, Dr. Fleming for your participation, fellow commissioners and the audience. I think we had a good discussion today. I also learned a lot and look forward to the continuing discussion as we move forward. So thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Haug. Do any other commissioners have any closing remarks you'd like to share? If so, please go ahead. Commissioner Shiroma.
I just want to say thank you. I found the discussion very insightful, and I look forward to next steps. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Shiroma. President Reynolds and Commissioner Reynolds, if you would like to provide any closing remarks, please go ahead. Well, thank you, commissioners. Thank you as well to SoCalGas and Sempra for the presentations, and Dr. Fleming for your participation. To all attendees for listening in and being interested in understanding this plan further. And in terms of procedural next steps, I stand corrected about the date for opening comments and reply comments. This should be, opening comments are intended to be due on September 19th and reply comments on October 10th. But these will be memorialized. We will make the slides and the recording available to the service list, and these will also be posted on the Safety, Culture, and Governance sections page of the CPUC's website. And you can always go there for more details about the proceeding and happenings on safety culture at the Commission. I will share also the link of that with the service list for anybody who doesn't have it. And with that, Thank you, everybody, and we conclude our workshop for the day. We are on time ahead. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.